Hey everybody, welcome into the Cubs Weekly Podcast presented by Wintrust, proud legacy partner of the Chicago Cubs and exclusive home of Cubs Checking. Open online today at wintrust.com/CubsWeekly. And as a reminder, we're available on all podcast platforms, so make sure you rate, subscribe. Andy Martínez here, Tony Andracki. Andy, we just watched the Cubs lose to the Pirates on Wednesday. It was a huge win for the team on Tuesday night. Wednesday seemed like the potential had the makings of a huge comeback, but I think overall, it was a quiet, muted clubhouse after the game. Just overall, what were your thoughts on losing Wednesday night to the Pirates here?
Yeah, so I kind of look at it in both sides of the coin, right? The first side is like, first of all, obviously, when you're in a playoff race and every game matters, there's no sugarcoating. Like a loss is a loss, and it's not good, right, in playoff chances. But I guess on the flip side of that coin is the Marlins lost, the Reds were off, the Diamondbacks won, but you're behind them.
Too, yeah.
Or the Reds lost, sorry, yeah. So you still maintain that third wild card position. They're not eliminated. They're not 4 games back with 5 to play or something. Like they're still in control of their own destiny. So like on that side of the coin, it's like, okay, like it's not the end of the world. And I think the thing about it too is like the offense was really the problem when they were going that 2-8 stretch against the Diamondbacks, the Rockies, and the Diamondbacks again. It was like the offense wasn't getting that big hit. They weren't getting that timely, that big double or that big home run. Well, you saw all of that over the last 2 days, right? Whether it was Canario hitting the home run on Tuesday or Dansby hitting the home run on Tuesday.
Back-to-back days with grand slams,
right?
Yeah.
Ian Happ with the grand slam on Wednesday. Like you saw the big hit, so like you kind of think like, okay, the pitching's been good overall. Like you're kind of allowed to have a bad outing. Like you know that there's going to be bad outings here and there. So you think, all right, the offense kind of is in a groove. That's kind of the way you look at it. I think that's the way to kind of look at it in when you're looking at it in this kind of like game by game fashion, which is kind of what you have to do given going down the stretch.
Yeah, no, I think it is for sure. The silver lining, obviously, that they didn't lose a playoff spot out of this.
Right.
10 games remain now. But I think it's a missed opportunity as well because Arizona, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee all one ahead of them. I mean, the Cubs are, 7.5 back now in the division? Seven full back in the division. Like,
I believe their elimination number is like 5.
Yeah, like the division's not happening at this point, even though
Barring
they have
like
3.
Something miraculous.
Yeah, which it sure just doesn't seem like it. I mean, the Brewers just are not losing right now.
Right.
They're almost never losing. So the fact that the Cubs would make up 7 games, even though they have 3 against the Brewers, it doesn't seem like that's a viable possibility at this point. But yeah, I mean, Philadelphia won, Arizona won in front of the Cubs as well. So they're 4 back of Philadelphia. It becomes increasingly unlikely that they're going to get that top wild card seed and host the wild card round as well. So it seems more and more likely that the Cubs are going to have one of the final 2 wild card spots. Again, you never know what can happen, but Philadelphia beating Atlanta on Wednesday was a pretty big win for them as well. So a little bit of a missed opportunity in the sense of like creating a little more separation between Miami, who's only a half game behind the Cubs, or Cincinnati, who's a game back, or San Francisco, who's 3 games back. Like, you could have created a bit more separation there, especially considering, we've talked about this a lot, the tiebreaker scenario. The Cubs only have a tiebreaker over San Francisco of all the teams in the wild card race right now. So if it comes down to it, I mean, they're essentially 5 games behind the Phillies, because if they tie the Phillies have the tiebreaker. So, you got to make up all of this ground. It's really difficult to do. And when you're only a half game up on the Marlins like that, you don't have much wiggle room. But that being said, I agree with you. I think the offense was a bright spot, and Ian Happ said it as well after Wednesday's game, that 2 good ones in a row, something for them to build on, something for them to create a little bit of positive momentum. It's just the pitching that was super concerning about Wednesday's game, starting with Justin Steele. He looked awesome for the first 3 innings and then really hit a wall in the 4th and couldn't get out of that at all.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because we look at a Tuesday night where Blake Snell goes 7 no-hit innings, and it kind of seemed like, all right, he's really cemented the NL Cy Young, like that's his to lose. And then when Steele comes out with 6 strikeouts in the first 3 innings, it's kind of like, oh, wait, like Justin Steele might be saying this thing isn't over. And then it seemed like, and he put it perfectly after the postgame, after the game, he said it perfectly. He's like, it seemed like everything that they were putting the bat on was finding grass and becoming a hit, and that was so accurate. Those 6 singles that he gave up in a row, none of them were hit over 93 miles an hour. Like they were all, I don't want to say like soft contact, because I mean a couple of them were like 90, a couple of them were like 88. They were pretty solid contact, but they're not 100 mile an hour line drive into the gap type of thing. Like these were dinks and dunks, and there was the one that he was able to feel that he right in front of home plate, and he couldn't make a throw. Like it was just kind of like compounding, and ultimately it led to him being pulled. And then a couple batters later, when Jose Cuas comes in, it's a 3-run homer, and the game is seemingly out of hand. Obviously, they made a little bit of a rally, but really the relief corps overall also did struggle. Like every pitcher except for Brad Boxberger and Luke Little, who faced one hitter, allowed a run in the game. Like that just can't happen. That's compounding not compounding interest, compounding problems on your
That's
team.
a totally
right?
different
Yeah,
podcast.
My mind's somewhere else, I guess. But you think about it, like you're behind the 8 ball, and then your reliever starts giving up another run and another run and another run. Like you're just playing further and further behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, we were talking about it in the game in the press box. Was after Ian Happ hits the grand slam, Morel had a homer earlier in the inning. And it was loud in Wrigley.
Yeah.
And then Cody Bellinger gets a double right after the grand slam. Like that was, I think, the loudest I'd heard Wrigley this year was right after the Bellinger double there.
And I'll say really quickly, like it was eerily similar to when the Cubs played Seattle early in the year when they rallied from a 7-run deficit. And I pointed out to you, like in the 10th game of the year, they rallied from 7 runs, and there's 10 games left, and they had a 7-run deficit. And it's like maybe they're doing it again. Obviously, they did not. But
they did not.
But
that
was
alert.
yes. that I had to get that quick antidote in.
Well, I mean, they get all the way back to 8-6, and they're right there. They're in, right, like sniffing on or whatever. I'm losing a phrase. They're chipping away at the Pirates' lead, and they're trying to make this comeback, and everything's going well. But then Mark Leiter Jr. comes in, and we're like, oh, interesting choice, Mark Leiter Jr. coming out. Ross really wants to get this win, and he wants to keep things close. He's using one of his A relievers out there, and then Leiter gets tagged for a few runs. So like it was not the shutdown inning that teams talk about, that Ross talks about wanting, and you had one of your best relievers. It wasn't Luke Little or Daniel Palencia or one of these rookies who was in his first few big league outings. It was Mark Leiter Jr., who has been one of your relief aces all year, to give up a few runs, to give up a home run as well. Like it was definitely it was very deflating, I felt like. And even though the Cubs added on a little bit after that, and had some other rallies, I think that the game was lost in that moment when Leiter came in and gives up 3 runs after all that. Yeah,
it was like you have the positive momentum rolling, and it just immediately stops. And you want that shutdown inning, and you could play the game of what if you had brought Boxberger, or maybe what if you had brought in Stroman to try and bridge the gap for a little longer, a couple innings maybe, and then bridge it to Leiter and Merriweather. But he trusted Leiter, and the pocket kind of made sense, right? There was a lefty and then a switch hitter, and it was their 9-hole hitter leading off, who you kind of trust Mark Leiter to get that, and it just didn't happen. And those things have that's kind of been the crummy luck that has been facing the Cubs during this tough stretch. It seems like every bad, I think back to Hayden Wesneski in extra innings, where he's pitching really well, and then they hit a single right off of him with 2 strikes and 2 outs, and they come back, and Arizona comes back and wins the game. So the bad luck was not going for the Cubs' way there.
No, and I mean, I think going back to Steele, and you talked about luck was certainly a factor, but also the Pirates were expanding the zone. They had several of those hits were pitches outside the zone. The wheels just fell off really fast, and I think the concerning part is that he looked so good, and then all of a sudden the 4th inning, and I think there's obvious questions about, is he fading down the stretch? We obviously don't know. They're not going to come and say it, and also they don't know right now, immediately after the game. But I think it's a very fair question, because he's up well over 30 innings beyond his professional high. I mean, actually, I think he's in the 40 or 50 range beyond his professional high. It was 119 or 120 coming into this year, and he's at 168. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he's blown by his workload that he has had in previous years, and this is back-to-back clunkers on the stat sheet. But David Russ said he didn't quite see it that way. He actually felt like Steele pitched pretty well in Arizona. It was 6 runs in 6 innings, I think it was, but it was 2 3-run homers. Yep. And he didn't feel like Steele had pitched poorly leading up to that. It was like a bloop hit or some weak contact and a walk, and then it was a first pitch slider that was hammered into the bleachers, and that happened twice. So he's looking at the big picture, and he did say alarm bells twice just about the way that 4th inning played out for Steele. So I am curious if there was something the Cubs saw in that, or it was just their bad luck. So I think trying to decipher that over the next few days will be really interesting. But Steele was lined up to make 3 starts in these final 11 games. You had Wednesday, He'll start at some point in that Atlanta Braves series. I guess he'll have to start on Tuesday, the way it'll line up, the first game of the Braves series. And then he's on track to start game 162 against the Brewers, knowing that like if you have a chance to punch the ticket to the playoffs, you have your ace going. And then if you don't need him, he's on full rest for game 1 of that wild card series on the following Tuesday. So I think they had it all lined up, but now the question marks obviously are out there of how much you can rely on Steele. Were these just two kind of isolated incidents, or is it the sign of him maybe running into a wall, pitching far deeper into a season than he ever has before?
Yeah, it's a really valid question. It's an interesting one because there's been times throughout the year, and I even look at the first inning, right, where it's single, double, second and third, one out, and it's like, ooh, like to me that was the first alarm bell, quote unquote, that for Justin Steele was, all right, you just gave up 6 runs in your last outing, first inning of this next outing in a big game, you allow a single and a double, and you're on the defensive right away. He's able to get out of that with a pair of strikeouts, and then he has 2 good innings where he just cruises. You're like, all right, he's settled into his groove, and that's kind of been the story of him. I think it was the Milwaukee game, the last time Milwaukee was in Chicago, where Justin Steele had some really high pitch count innings, and I think he still made it through 7 innings, and gave them a real outing. And I'm like, wow, that's a really gutsy performance from Justin Steele. I think I even talked about it on the pod where it's like, that wasn't stat-wise necessarily his best outing, but I thought it was his best outing of the year just given the result and how he pitched and worked through that outing. That's kind of who he's been throughout this year. That, to me, is the shocking and alarming part where it's been like he's run into trouble numerous times throughout the year, and he's been able to get out of it. The last 2 times, the big hit has come. Is that a fluke? Like, is he due for some regression? Maybe. Is it a sign of him wearing down? Maybe. Like, we probably won't know the answer. We might not ever know the answer, but that is definitely the truth right now, and that's the reality that the Cubs are facing. And we'll see what, I guess, in the next outing, whether that was a sign of fatigue, whether it was some regression, or if we'll get back to being the Justin Steele that he was throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said too, that he has gotten out of so many jams this year, and that start in Arizona, he was literally 1 pitch away from having a quality start because there were 2 outs in the 6th inning there. If he gets I forget who it was, Alec Thomas that hit the homer.
Yeah.
If he retires Alec Thomas instead of giving up a 3-run homer, he's given up 3 runs in 6 innings. Like, still a 4.50 ERA. I get what everybody says about quality starts with that, but it's still a quality start, and he still went 6 innings. You know, he retired the next batter. So, like, he gave the Cubs length. He kept them in the game, obviously, up until that point. But Wednesday here was a little bit different. I am curious to see how the next start is. I don't necessarily think that he's running into a wall. I'm not going to say, 1 poor inning here. And I see you looking at the whole big picture because I thought he looked as good as he has looked all year in the first 3 innings.
Those 3 first innings were great.
Yeah. Like, yes, he gave up a couple of hits, but then to strike out back-to-back hitters to get out of the inning in the first, I just thought he looked pretty good. But that with the other pitching injuries the Cubs have, the other pitching question marks, they lose Justin Steele, their Cy Young candidate, their horse. If he is running into a wall, if he is not the guy, if he can't turn the corner next week in Atlanta, then yeah, I think they're in a much more precarious playoff position than they currently are. They need guys like Kyle Hendricks, Javier Asada's still been pitching well. Jordan Wicks has been doing great, but he's had, 4 starts, whatever, in his big league career. And then Jameson Taillon has been up and down and dealing with, a little stuff too, because it'll go about 10 days in between his outings. So the Cubs definitely need Steele to be who he is, not only for the rest of the regular season, but like if they make it in the playoffs, game 1, game 2, game 3, however it plays out, they need him to be Justin Steele.
Yeah, like if the Cubs are going to go on a run, if the Cubs are going to make it in the playoffs, and if they're going to make a run in the playoffs, like it centers a lot around Justin Steele, right? He's been their ace. He's been the guy that's gotten them here. Like, he's the guy that's taken them from being a team that you didn't know what to expect going into the year to a playoff contender. Like, he's been one of the best pitchers in the National League, as Ian Happ says, and as the stats back up. And they need him to be at least, maybe not the elite level that he was, but a pretty darn good version of himself to make a run.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break here on the Cubs Weekly Podcast. When we come back, we're going to talk about Marcus Stroman and his role over the next week and a half of the season, and then also the Nick Madrigal injury and why it's low-key one of the major injuries and questions that the Cubs face here over the next 10 games.
We know you love Chicago. You devour the pizza, admire Chicago's skyline, and cheer on Chicago sports teams, especially the Cubs. If you wanted to live in a more boring place, you'd live in St. Louis. Why not bank with Chicago's Bank too? Upgrade your wallet with an exclusive Wintrust Cubs debit card, which you can get when you open a Wintrust Cubs checking account. Show your Cubs pride and open an account at wintrust.com/Cubs. Member FDIC, equal housing lender.
All right, welcome back into the Cubs Weekly Podcast. Andy Martínez, Tony Andracki here. And Andy, let's talk a little Marcus Stroman. It was pretty much the only pregame talk we had today, Wednesday. He detailed a little bit more about his injury and his recovery back. And then there was the only questions that Ross actually was asked pregame was just Stroman, how he's a weapon, how he's going to be utilized. And I think that's going to be one of the most fascinating developments over the next 10 games, and then especially after if the Cubs get into the playoffs. What role does Stroman fill? What innings does he pitch in out of the bullpen? And then does he make it back at all to be into the starting rotation, especially by the time, say they're in the wild card series, games 1, 2, 3, or whatever it is, like, does Marcus Stroman start one of those playoff games?
I mean, I think that's a real shot, like that he could do that. Like, and I'll go into my reasoning, but the one thing I will say is, like, he mentioned in pregame that he could have, like, had he not pitched on back-to-back, like his next outing, he thinks he could have gone maybe like 4 or 5 innings. Mm-hmm. And I'm of the notion that, like, a lot of times athletes will say these things and like hype themselves up. In Marcus Stroman's case, I mean, he's the guy, like, who's, if he says something, like, all right, he's pretty darn close to saying, like, that's pretty darn close to accurate. Like, he pitched on back-to-backs after coming back from this injury. Like, that's
for the first time
ever.
Career, yeah.
Right? He hasn't relieved since his rookie year. Like, it's just remarkable what he did from, like, a pure physical recovery standpoint. Like, to be doing what he's doing is kind of remarkable, just given that it was a 4 to 6 week recovery and he's back in, it's like 2 or 3 weeks. Like, yeah, like, it's pretty incredible. But so when he says that he thinks he can go 4 to 5, like, if you think about that, and maybe he goes an inning or 2 in his next outing, or 2 or 3 innings the following outing, et cetera, like, that lines you up where if you're in a playoff game and you're in a game 2 or game 3, like, or Marcus Stroman's the perfect guy, whether it's a long opener, right, where he goes 3-4 innings, or a decent opener where he goes 4 or 5. Maybe your bullpen's healthier at that point. Maybe you have Michael Fulmer there who can then bridge the gap, and you have Leiter and Merriweather, maybe Alzolay. Like, that shortens the game. That is a real weapon to have. And I think back to back in June and July, like, when the conversation was centered around, like, are the Cubs buyers or sellers? One of the things I thought of like, why the Cubs should be buyers or have a real good shot at the playoffs was, especially at the time, like, there was not a better 1-2 punch, I thought, in the National League than Justin Steele and Marcus Stroman, the way they were going. And now you're getting the chance to potentially see that, like that.
With, like, Kyle Hendricks pitching well, yeah.
With Kyle Hendricks pitching well. And then you have guys like Jordan Wicks or Javier Assad who could provide some sort of different role in a 3-game series. Like that, those are all intriguing weapons and intriguing options that make you a little bullish on their playoff odds if there's health and everything goes well.
Yeah, and so touching on the playoffs for now, obviously we're getting ahead of ourselves a bit, but
right.
Like that's what the Cubs are working towards. That's what they're striving towards. But I was talking to Tommy Hotovy today, Wednesday before the game, and he was saying, he's like, we don't know exactly how anything in the playoffs would line up, but maybe Stroman would go 3 innings, maybe Smiley's for 2 or 3, or Hayden Wesneski's for 2 or 3 after, and then you, like you mentioned, all the other bullpen guys. But right now the Cubs are just piecing together the bullpen, and we talked about it in the last podcast, like 60% of their opening day rotation is in the bullpen right now. It's been a strange year, but it's also been a strange last couple of weeks, and in a lot of ways the bullpen is limping into this final stretch and potentially into the postseason here. It's not ideal from that sense. The bullpens are so important. We've seen just over the last decade, but really even over the last few years, how important it is to have a set guys in your circle of trust, in Ross's circle of trust, that he can call to. So if Jordan Wicks starts a playoff game, he doesn't have to go more than 3 or 4 innings. Or if Justin Steele gets in trouble, like we saw in the 4th inning of Wednesday's game, there's a lot more length down there, and you have some of your high leverage arms. So bullpens are super, super important in the playoffs. The Cubs getting theirs right obviously depends so much on health, Edward Alzolay and Michael Fulmer, like you said. But then also the Stroman factor of, like, and that's what I find so interesting about it, is he is a guy that can go out and pitch in a variety of different ways. He can pitch multiple innings. He can pitch 1 inning. He can get 1 out in a huge spot, and then you take him out if that ends the inning and doesn't have to face the 3-batter minimum. He can work back-to-backs. He's already proven that and pitched well. And he's one of the best pitchers on the team, best pure talent pitchers. You can pick him put him in a spot where, oh, you need him in the 9th inning. Oh, you need him in the 7th to set up for Leiter and Merriweather. Like, however you want to utilize him, like, you have him out there. And to know that you kind of have like an ace in your back pocket from Ross's perspective, I think is a comforting feeling given the fact that they just don't have many other trusted options right now. There's just a bunch of rookies and inexperienced guys down there.
And to that point, it was an interesting point that David Ross mentioned. He remembers talking to Ryan Dempster in 2013 when the Red Sox made their run, and Ryan Dempster went up to the Red Sox brass and was like, "Hey, I'm ready for any role that you want me in." Because if you think about it, a starter will have faced pitching in a bases loaded situation. We'll have faced a runner at third with less than 2 out situation. Like, they've been in all these situations, and Marcus Stroman has been in all those situations this year. He's pitched in the 9th inning of a game. He has a complete game to his credit. He knows what it's like to be in those moments. So, yeah, if it's bases loaded and you think the best matchup is Marcus Stroman against that hitter, that's not a moment where you're going to have to call on Marcus Stroman and you're going to be worried about him being like, oh my gosh, like, it's bases loaded, like, I got to be perfect. Like, you don't have to worry about that. It's not like a rookie or an inexperienced guy who hasn't come in a dirty inning. Like, he's only come in clean innings. Like, you don't have to worry about all that. And with Marcus Stroman, that's a valuable asset. And maybe that is why the bullpen is his best role, right? If Javier Assad and Kyle Hendricks and Jordan Wicks are pitching well along with getting Justin Steele right, then having Marcus Stroman being able to go 4 innings over 2 days is much more valuable than having him start once for 4 innings and having to wait a few days.
Yeah, that's actually exactly something that Hottovy said as well. Is like, just imagine that Stroman, they're trying to build him up, and they're starting him 3 times on the Justin Steele path. He's going to start 3 times over the final 11 games, starting with Wednesday. Is he at 3 innings in those starts, or maybe he works all the way up to 5? But you're talking about like 9, 10, 11 innings over the course of the next 11 games. If you have 11 innings from him, do you always want them to come in that spot, or do you want to utilize maybe 8 of the most high leverage innings over the next 11 games or
right.
10 games now at this point? And I think that's the most interesting part. And like, maybe if he's going well, he pitches the last 4 innings of a game. And we've seen that from Keegan Thompson before as well, and then he shut down for a couple of days and then bounces back. So that's what I think is really interesting. He warmed up several times in Wednesday's game, didn't ultimately get into the contest, but there's a few days off now. I know he's ready for Thursday, Friday, and so on. But I think that's just how the Cubs utilize him in the regular season, and then if he is able to build up, because it's such a neat, they have to thread the needle so finely here, where they have to build him up. They have to make sure that he's healthy. He's not fully healthy from this rib cartilage fracture. Like, he's not going to be until the off season. He even admitted that today. And they need to try to win games to get to the playoffs. And then once they get in the playoffs, they have 1 off day before they got to, start a playoff series and get right back into it. So it's going to be very difficult for sure. But I think we talk so much about the bullpen injuries. The Nick Madrigal injury is something that, we touched on just a bit in the podcast a couple of days ago, but now we found out he's on the injured list. Jared Young, comes back up. Young's not going to have a big role on this team right now, but Nick Madrigal did. He had a really big role. He was playing third base. He was essentially their starter at third base. He occasionally was seeing some time on the bench with Patrick Wisdom at third against lefties. But until Jeimer Candelario comes back, it was Madrigal's job, because he was one of the premier defenders at third. Not something we all thought coming into the season. But when pitching and defense is so paramount, to have a defender that you trust at third base, a really good contact hitter, a guy who was a helpful part of the lineup as well, and now he's down, and Ross didn't want to rule out anything for the playoffs, but it sure seems pretty unlikely that he ever comes back this year from the hamstring injury, which he now has several years of hamstring injuries in a row.
Yeah, it was a crushing blow, but because like, even when Candelario was there, Candelario was playing a lot of first base, right? And Bellinger was in center field, or depending on the matchup, maybe Bellinger was on first and Candelario was on third. But Nick Madrigal was the everyday third baseman for a good portion since he was recalled in, I believe it was late June when he was called back from AAA. He was the starting third baseman, was a really darn good defensive third baseman, which I don't think any of us thought would have been the case in March a year ago.
I mean, not to this level.
No, he was in outs above average. I believe the only defenders that were ahead of him were like Manny Machado, Maikel Garcia,
and Ke'Bryan Hayes.
He was ahead of guys like Nolan Arenado. Like, it was kind of incredible what he's been able to do defensively. and his bat was starting to come around, right, where he was getting the singles, but he was also getting the doubles. He had a couple home runs. Like it was trending to be a good season for him on both sides of the plate. That to me was a big loss because it also eliminates some of the versatility in the Cubs lineup. There was so much that was available, especially even when Jeimer Candelario was healthy. But you think about it, like you can move Cody Bellinger around first and center. You could move Jeimer Candelario around. You can DH Mike Tauchman or start him in center. Like it created so much positional flexibility in that first game back where Nick Madrigal's on the IL. That's kind of when it showed just how thin everything was on the offensive side. Christopher Morel had only started a couple times in the field since June. I think it was 2 times, and both were in the outfield that he had started since June. And he was starting third base that day, and Patrick Wisdom was at first base. And it was just such a...
And Canario was DHing for his first career start.
Right. Yeah. Like, it was just created so much... And that was like a must-win game, and these were the situations you were in. Like, that Madrigal injury to me was huge, was so huge for the Cubs. Miles Mastrobuoni had a really, really... Like, I think we haven't talked about it, but Wednesday night's game, Miles Mastrobuoni had a terrific game, 3 hits, a couple doubles and a single. He looked pretty good, if you remember, around June when he was getting some playing time. Then he was optioned. Like, if that can be a thing, like that's a really good option off the left-handed side. Perez a good glove and has got some speed. So like that's what you look for. But this Nick Madrigal injury is really probably the biggest one of the bunch, just given the other ones that have happened before.
Well, yeah, and like you said, you know it because of just where every game has this added importance to it right now, and we've heard all along, like in the common line of a game in September 20th is not necessarily any more important than April 20th. That's true in theory, but we're humans, and obviously this is more important right now. Like, you know that you go into September 19th needing to win, and in a game where they need to win, like you said, Christopher Morel is playing third base, a position he hadn't played in 3+ months, in a position that the Cubs we're just not sure. And, you know, there's some question marks about his defense over there, and particularly his throwing, and that's why he's been DHing a lot over the last 3 months. And then Alexander Canario, who had not started at all in the 2.5 weeks that he had been up since September 1st when he was first up as a call-up, then he's starting at DH. Now, obviously it worked out, and we'll get to Canario, in a little bit here. Morel had a good game as well, but then Wednesday, Miles Mastrobuoni starting for the first time in over a month. He's been up here as exclusively a pinch runner. Occasionally has come in, like the extra inning game, and he's been pinch hit and defensive replacement and stuff at times. But that was his first start in a really long time. And so the Cubs are in these must-win games, and they're relying on people in different spots than they had been in normally. And it's not just the rookies. It's not just PCAs out there like we saw last week in Colorado. It's a guy like Miles Mastrobuoni being out there without much playing time, or it's Stroman in a position he had never been in before. Like, the Cubs are trying to pull out all the stops, but that's why I think that, like you said, the Madrigal thing is low key of some major importance in this team. Yep. Because we also don't know when Candelario is going to come back. He's progressing,
or what he'll be when he comes back.
Yeah, he had some pretty serious back injuries. Working his way back, but like that 10-day IL stint, he's due to come off
Friday.
I think it's Friday. There's not necessarily any indication right now that he is going to be off by Friday. Maybe he will. Maybe he's just going to give it a go at 70% or whatever he is. But he was struggling for a few weeks before he went on the IL as well offensively. So I think what the Cubs do at third base, how they manage all these depth pieces, is a major question mark as well. And now they're at the time where they have 10 games left, including some against Atlanta and a series against Milwaukee in there.
Yeah, it's a crucial stretch, and like the worst timing for injury. Not that you don't want to say like this injury is a good timing for an injury. Like, there's no such thing as that. But like, this is really a pivotal stretch into you can kind of get away in June 20th and giving an off day to Nick Madrigal or to Nico Horner and put Morel at second base or third base and like feel like you can kind of get away with it. But in September, like, there's no off day, so like you want to have your best offense and your best defensive unit. And when you're having to rely on some of these guys that haven't played those positions in a long time in a game setting, and I know they're taking reps, and I know they're getting their work in every single day, but nothing replicates the game feel. And that to me is like the biggest concern when these situations come up, is like, how will they react when 100-mile-an-hour liners hit to them in the bottom of the 8th inning? We'll find out when that comes.
Yeah, and we talk about young guys getting opportunities too, and Alexander Canario, his first start Tuesday night, it was a little bit difficult at the start, swinging and misses to some pitches, and then as he's in the on deck circle, there's that weird pop fly. I think Patrick Wisdom hit it right,
Yep.
and there's a foul ball. He's called out for batter's interference because he's kind of backing away as the catcher's running out, the Pirates catcher, but it was Cabrian Hayes from third base who came and actually bumped into Canario. They ended up calling Wisdom out on batter interference, even though it was the on-deck interference.
Right.
I've never seen a play quite like that.
Yeah.
Like
I had no idea how to score it on my scorebook.
Oh, no, not at all. And so, as umpires are talking about it, here's Canario, who's in his first big league start. He's like 0 for 3 in his career prior to that point. And it's like, it must be a lonely, isolating feeling.
Yeah.
And a couple pitches later, he hammers a double to left. First big league hit, first big league RBI. 2 innings later, grand slam in the left field bleachers, and the route is on. It was just an awesome, epic night for Canario, to the point where Christopher Morel was so excited he had to take his shirt off yet again.
Yeah, and that was a cool backstory. I went up to Morel because Javier Assad mentioned in his postgame presser that Amaya and Morel were talking, and they predicted a home run. And Morel, I caught up with Morel after the game, and he's like, yeah, like it was one of those things, like you just have a feeling that he's going to hit a home run, and he had the feeling that Canario was going to hit a home run. And he was telling everyone, he's like, guys, he's going to hit a home run, he's going to hit a home run, and when he hits a home run, I'm going to take my shirt off. And which first of all, like why that is your thought, I don't know, but I mean, that's Christopher Morel to a T.
He did it once for that walk-off from the White Sox,
right?
and you
like
just got to keep it up.
Like, yeah, I guess, yeah, it's a big soccer celebration, so maybe that's where, I don't know. Like, there was just so much emotion, and he, like, both came through to their word, right? Canario hits the home run, Morel takes his shirt off, everyone's going crazy. It's a viral moment, right? Everyone loved seeing Morel take his shirt off. And when you're doing that, like, good things are happening, and what a good moment for Canario, especially just like we talked about, those 2.5 weeks where he's just on the bench and watching and observing. And there's definitely a lot of value in that, right? Like being around a team chasing the pennant chase and being around the environment and being a major league clubhouse. But it's asking a lot for him to come in and start. And he was starting because there was a lefty on the mound, which was an opener, and then there was a righty on the mound, so who knows if the matchup really lined up. It ended up lining up, and it looked like he belonged, and he had not missed a beat. Like, it looked like he had been playing every day for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, those balls were loud. The double and the home run were very loud. They were great swings. It was the first time I had seen it, obviously, in person. We've seen it quite a bit in the minor leagues. But it was definitely a special night. It's kind of funny that's just how baseball works, right? It's like this epic night. There's so much to talk about on Tuesday, and then Wednesdays, in large part, like, again, kind of a clunker. Like, Justin Steele was going well. The Cubs had a lead. Seiya Suzuki had another nice hit. And then all of a sudden it falls off pretty quickly. And then it's like, oh, the Cubs are coming back. Ian Happ hits a grand slam. Cody Bellinger gets another double. And then it's like, bam, Mark Leiter Jr. has a tough outing again. So, like, it's a little bit of one step forward, one step back right now, I feel like, for the Cubs. And a lot of the reason behind that is the injuries and is guys potentially wearing down at this point in the season. So it's going to be a super interesting final 10 games here. We're going to have another podcast for you. As a reminder, we're doing podcasts twice a week now, so they'll come out on Monday and on Thursday throughout the rest of the Cubs season, however long that goes, whether it's through October 1st or through the wild card or through the World Series, however it may be. So maybe we'll be talking to you guys here in early November as the Cubs put the finishing touches on their next World Series run. Whatever it may be, we have you covered here on the Cubs Weekly Podcast. For Andy, I'm Tony. Thanks as always for listening. And as a reminder, we're sponsored by Wintrust. Check us out in video form on the Marquee Sports Network app and YouTube.